Hi guys, this is Ticky. We're going to do a Rolex watch today in Affinity Designer. We're going to start off with a 728 by 880 template. Make sure it's in the transparent. First thing we're going to do is we're going to choose our textures. We're going to use 14 karat gold. Need to organize my textures better. So we'll drag that out. And as we use these, we're just going to duplicate them. Okay, so now I need my second ticks. And we're going to use like a chrome gradient for that. Make it look realistic. And for our inlays, I want kind of a shiny white texture. Give it a realistic look. Okay, so those will be our 3 textures that we're going to use for this watch. It's a very simple watch. It's a good one to start with if you've never done a watch before. Okay, and that will be the Rolex that we're going to use as our model for this. All right, let's get started. Right now we're putting our black background in. That'll be our base. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our second ticks sized. And what I usually like to do is make that at about a 5 point and then stretch it. And for whatever reason, Affinity Designer doesn't hold the measurements very well. When we rotate this around, sometimes it loses a little bit. So I always check it at the 90-degree mark to make sure that we're on track, and then I'll reset it if it needs it. It doesn't go off by much, but it goes off enough. You know, we're making a timepiece. We want to have as accurate as possible seconds on this, so I really fight to get this in here at 5. I should have zoomed in right there. Sometimes when you struggle at a distance like that, it's really painstaking to get it right at 5. You zoom in and you get a little bit slower count. I'll see what I tried to do is I tried to move it, and I lost the 5 points again. So now I got to go back in there and do it again. All these little mistakes are time consuming if you're doing these a lot. This whole process took me about an hour, maybe a little over an hour. Okay, so we finally dialed that in. And like I said, we're going to run this at 6 point. So we'll dial that in at 6 degrees, I'm sorry. And then we'll run that quarter of the way down, which will be 90 degrees. And with the length of this, we're doing both sides of the watch at the same time. So we'll get back down to 90. That'll be a straight horizontal. Okay, and we'll check it. We'll make sure we're at 90. Then we're going to start back in and we'll dial it back in. And that'll make this 96 where we start this. And then we'll hit the duplicate again and just keep repeating the duplicate. There, we got it dialed in at 96. And we'll just take it around, duplicate all the way up to the top here. We're doing this on an iPad. There's probably a command key to do this where you don't have to keep doing, as you're seeing, like I got to keep hitting the top tab and then hitting the duplicate. There's probably a hotkey for that on the desktop version. All right, so what we're doing here is we're going to mask off the corners. As you know, the watch face is not squared or rectangled on the Apple Watch. So what we have to do is we have to round it a little bit on the tops. And we'll mask that off. We'll go back with the pen tool now, and all the extras on the corners. I'm setting my brush size, and we're just going to take those out. We'll give it a nice, clean, polished look when we're done. By using a gradient, you can see it really is a nice texture. It's not a, you see a lot of other watches when they're done, they just look kind of flat. And this really gives the finished product a real pop that I like. And to each their own. Some people might not care for that. Okay, so now we're going to use a solid shape. And we're going to crop out the inside. So we'll just flip that. Round it, round a rectangle, and then we'll just drag it in and size it up. As I said before, I don't painstakingly measure these out and do all the work that some people might do to make everything really proportionate. I eyeball everything. So yeah, sometimes that may show up painfully obvious in the finished product if you're a perfectionist. I suppose I kind of do this more like an artistic tool. I say, well, this is about what it looks like. This is how I interpret it. Okay, so we have that set. Now we'll merge this. And then drag it to the side, and then we'll discard everything that's on the artboard, clean up the clutter. All right, now that's discarded. Now we can drag back and start with our triangle. I'm gonna make our reference a little bit bigger, and right now I'm looking at the second ticks. That way I see that it's about 1 second on either side. So I'll use that as a reference, and I'll go in and I'll pull that down. About 1 second on either side. So it still looks a little big. Dial that in. Our snapping tool always centers it. So we have that dialed in at the size we want it now. Now we bring our textures in. Now I want to duplicate that triangle because that's also going to be an inlay shape. So right now we're going to do our gold that's at the outside. And be mindful that if you're going to watch where your light sources are, make sure that when you're putting your textures in, those textures will also match up with where your light source originates. Okay, so now we have that set. We'll probably FX that and make that three-dimensional. Right there, I rotated the lighter to the top left corner. Okay. Now we're going to drag that in. On these, I didn't emboss these because I don't know, it just didn't look right. There's another method to make these look three-dimensional, and that's by using shadows. And I use inner shadows for these. As you can see, it really gives that some depth. There you have it. Now we'll merge those. That'll make that one piece. We'll drag it to the side and then discard the rest. Okay, now we're going to work on rectangles right after we merge. We're going to merge our work because we know we have to have the artboard free. Okay, so start off with another rectangle. Again, looking at the second ticks. That way we can size it up and make it look reasonably proportionate. So we're happy with our shape. Now what we have to do is just follow the same process again. We grab our textures, and there's a mistake that happens quite often. I'll pull at it, and distort it. I'll have to redo it again. It's just part of the process. I'm not going to cut out any of that. I'll show you how I work through these mistakes. Alright, so I added the effect, the 3D effect there. Now I'm going to have to go back a step, and I'm going to have to size that up again. I use the watch as a reference. I know right about where I want to have it. Still, you have to trust your eyes. You look at it and see, does that look proportionate? If you're going to use this method. Now, if you know how to do the measurements and make everything exactly as it's supposed to be, I guess that's another way to do it. But I don't know. I don't have the math skills to do that, so I just eyeball everything. Okay, we're going to use the same method here. We're not going to emboss this either. We're gonna use shadows to give this some depth. We want it to look three-dimensional. We want it to look real. You don't have to do this. You could make it without adding the shadows and stuff if you just wanted to do a really basic Rolex. But I'm showing you all the little intricacies of this that give it that realistic look that I like when it's done. See how much different that looks with all the depth in there. And the nice texture that I chose. It just really makes that pop. Okay, then we're going to discard this. And since there's two of those, we'll just be able to duplicate that and use that on the left hand side where the 9 is and the 6. We'll just use the duplicate option now. Check to see where our light and shadows are, and then we'll spin our object accordingly. I gotta put this back at 90 degrees, and then I'll slide it where I want it. And I'll make sure that everything is locked in. At this point, I'm looking at this and I'm saying this looks a little too big. So I make the adjustment. Just going to size these down just a little bit so it looks more proportionate. Instead of doing that twice, what I'll do is I'll adjust one and then just duplicate it like I did before, and then spin it into shape. Spin it into position. All right, we have those locked in pretty well. Now we want to work on the circles. I've done a few of these, so I have a really rough idea of what everything should be as far as how many points, what the size should be for each side, for each one. So I think this was like 85 by 85, and I'll duplicate this. I'll go through the same process, same exact process over and over again. You'll get really good at it if you do enough. You won't even have to think or reference anything anymore. You just go back and repeat the process. So I'm manipulating my texture. I'm going to dial it in the way I want it to look, and then I'll merge it. I just drag it, watch that blue line so it centers right on top of that circle, and then it merges. And then I can add an effect to it, whatever I want to do at that point. You can resize it, anything. Same process. Over and over again. None of this is overly complicated. It's just doing it once or twice and figuring it out and going through the steps. All right, so I'm going to move this in to the center of my artboard. So when I pull this other circle in, it'll snap into place. All I have to do is measure it out here, which, like I said before, it can be a real pain sometimes. You could see somebody watermark that image, but when it's this small, you can't see it, so I don't really bother worrying about that too much. And when you're doing this, you're the artist. You can make that as big or as small as you want. You want a little more gold, you want a little more inlay, you adjust it to your liking. I'm not making a replica. I'm making more of an impression of the Rolex. You're taking a round dial and you're going to a rectangle. It's not going to be perfect. All right, so we're going to shadow this and give it some nice depth. That really looks deep, even at a distance. The darker you make that, the deeper it looks. All right, so we're going to discard what's on our artboard. And there may be a better way to do what I'm going to do here, but this is the way I choose to do it. If you have another way of setting these, let me know in the comments. What I do is I take a long rectangle, the size of the inlay that I'm going to put on the board, dial down the opacity. Oh, I accidentally merged those two. So I'm going to make it the size of my inlay. Okay. And basically I'm just going to take that and move it, duplicate that around the board at 30 degrees where all of our numbers would rest. So 30 degrees. And we'll hit the duplicate button. Okay. Now we have a nice little template that our inlay should sit in. And the snapping tool will keep me honest. As you'll be able to see here. We set one. Then when we drag the next one down, hit the duplicate, it's gonna show me where it's centered. See it grab? It's got two green marks there, it centered it. So in essence, it does a lot of the work for me. Dial that in, see, make sure that it stays within my boundaries that rectangle is set. You can see those red lines going across. It tells me I'm exactly in line with the other side. Boom, it locked in. One more. And it's locked. Okay. Yeah, now Also, sometimes you bring in a grid if I see something that doesn't quite look right, and I think the 5 looked a little off to me. It's just a hair off, it looks like. So I'll take that and I'll pull it into position. There. Perfect. I'll turn the grid off. Knock all this out. Merge it. No, we didn't merge it there. Looks like we're going to work with the date right now. So we'll size that. I look to see how many of the second ticks it should be set at to make it look proportionate. And once I get that dialed in, then I'll bring my effects in, and I'll follow the same process that I did with everything else. I'll add some shadows. Sometimes I will use the bevel. I use the gradient on this. Give it a little shadow on the inside, a little extra shadow. I don't want to overdo it. It's just got a nice little gradient there. We beveled this, and now you can see that I'm gonna dial in a really nice shadow to really give this some depth. You back up and you can really see some depth here. And this is how I do the lens. I use a gradient, and I flip it so the light side is wherever my light source is, in this case being the left. Bring it back to 180. So now we just have to, I think I 3D'd beveled, and now we'll have to bring the opacity down. And it'll give it that lens look. Okay, that's about all it took right there. All right, so now we're going to import the logo. A lot of these logos you can find on the PNG sites. So you don't have to, some of these things you don't have to make. You can resource them. Somebody's already put a lot of work into it. And then you can fine tune it. Like this one's a silver. You can see that with the effects, I can manipulate something like that that's already been done and change it. This will actually use 2 of those crowns. So I will duplicate that crown and drag another one down because there's also one down there at the bottom. So Rolex uses a technique where they have Swiss, and it's written underneath some of these second ticks. So what I do is I just take a black triangle or rectangle, and I'll just mask off a portion of each one of those. I think, yeah, I have to do that one right underneath the big rectangle there. There. Okay. Now we bring our crown in. I'm going to double check to see the size of that crown. Make sure it looks proportionate. I think we're going to work on our texts now. For the Rolex text, Bakersville, I found this one on a website called defont.com. Set the actual Rolex name in bold. And this is really good up until the point where you want to write the word date just, and the J isn't right. The J hangs down too low. So usually when I do one that says date just, I'll have to switch to a different font when I write the date just, so it looks more correct. And here I'm just manipulating my text to make it stand out a little bit. You don't have to do all this stuff right here. These are just little extra things to give it some depth, give it some realism. I'm going back and I'm looking to see just how big that is in reference to the crown. The distance between the crown and the L. Little details like that will make a difference in the finished product. You'll notice that when I do all of the text underneath there now, I also will reference certain letters underneath, like the E or the X, and then I'll size it according to that and make everything proportionate. Okay, now that would be just flat if I left it like that. So I made that a 3D text. Okay, so I think I want the T under the X. I'm not really sure what I was referencing here. But I'll find one of the letters in either date or maybe it's the L I'm trying to center underneath there. But when I do that, then it's going to look a lot like the original watch. It's just going to look like that's supposed to be the way that's the way it was. Okay, that looks good. I don't think I adjust that anymore. Yep, the L under the X. Okay, so now we're going to go down. I think whatever the title of the watch is here, I think I switch back to bold. So depending on which watch I use, I'm going to switch between bold, semi-bold, and when I do the waterproof measurements, like the feet and the meter are both italicized. So Okay, this will all be in bold. I'm going to use my date and the positions of the 4 and 7 to see how to line this up. I didn't use, as you'll notice, I brought down the oyster text. That way I don't have to go back and reset everything. I'm going to use that same text size for what I do here. So that's 1000, and then I switch to bold, italic. Then the FT, space equal. And I have to switch back again. I'll type in my numbers, 300. Struggling here. Switch back to italic, M. And I'll reference it. Let's see where that M is, or the E, or 3, or whatever. One of these days I'll figure out how to type or spell officially. Thank goodness for autocorrect. It corrects me every time. Okay, we're going to slide that into position. The snapping tool will always keep us in the middle by having that little magnet in the bottom left always on. It's right above the trash on the bottom left hand side. Make sure that's on if you want to use the snapping tool. All right, 2 more lines of text and we'll be done with that. Okay, here's where I'm going to butcher officially. I'm going to officially butcher official. Now you can see, just like in any other text, when you misspell something, it'll put a nice little red line under there. Just to remind you that you should have learned a little something when you were in 6th grade, I guess. Yeah, I'll dial it in one of these days, officially. You finally officially spelled it correctly. Okay. Now we'll line everything up, make it look real pretty. And then we're going to do the Swiss after we line that all up at the very bottom. I used to put Tiki Made on there, but a lot of the guys gave me flack for that. They wanted Swiss Made written on the bottom, so Okay. Whatever. It's not that big of a deal to me. I just enjoy making these. I'll stretch this out. Size it down just a little bit. Recenter it. There we go. That looks good. And there you have it. That completes the dial portion of this. So we'll merge all that together. And then we'll go through and we'll delete all this. And then what we'll do is bring it back to the board. Top left icon there. And we're going to name this Rolex something. I can't remember what we named it. But we want to make sure that this is the high quality. We're saving it as a high quality JPEG. As you can see, the default is PNG there. And then we'll export that. Save it. I'll back out, then I'll get back in. I'll drag that out, and then we'll be ready to work on our hands. So I usually like to start off with about a 50 by 50 for the circle on the hands on almost everything I do. It just seems to be a really good starting point. Sometimes it's not the right size, but by and large 50-50 works on a good portion of what I'm doing. You'll notice that my horizontal vertical lines, they disappear. I still haven't figured out why that is, but again, I got to bring those back on. There's a couple ways that you can do these hands. You can bring that picture over and you can make it bigger and then spin it around and then try to duplicate each little, like this is a rectangle, and then just kind of like fit the pieces in piece by piece. Or you can just eyeball it. And that's pretty much the method I always use. I just eyeball everything. Each person's going to be a little different. This might work for you, this might not. You might have to bring the actual hand up and do everything, dial it in with your background image so it looks exactly the way that the original does, but I just don't do it like that. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other. This is just the way I do it. So you can see right now, I'm just putting basic shapes in. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, no, that triangle or the rectangle is going to be way, way too big. So I got to keep shrinking that down because I know that my pivot point is the middle of that bottom circle there. And I know that the top of the triangle should just about meet where that 9 rectangle was, the 9 position. So I'm going to keep manipulating everything until I get it where I feel that everything's going to line up the way I want it to. Always remember on your circles, you have to have, in order for it to be a circle, it has to be proportionate. So if that top measurement was 90, the side measurement also has to be 90. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Now we're going to get our cog tool out. 3 points. This takes a little getting used to. These, I don't know. For me, it took me a little while to be able to dial these in, because you can make a lot of different shapes with this cog tool. If you're not grabbing the right thing, you're going to end up with some really wonky looking shape. As you can see, that snapping tool is really nice. It really does a lot of the work for you. Keeps it centered. Okay, looks like I'm happy with where everything's at. I'm going to merge it, drag it to the side, discard what's on the artboard. I'm going to keep that circle, 50-50 circle. Duplicate my gold, and then I'm going to overlay it. Merge. I'm going to make this 3D. And I'm going to give it a little bit of an outer shadow. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it so I don't have to do any work to the bottom layer of the texture that I'm going to use for what goes behind there. So what the bottom layers are going to consist of are a rectangle, a circle, and a triangle. So that'll be what I'll do right here. I'll just make one of those shapes, one of each, a circle and a rectangle. All right, then I'm going to merge my white texture with each one of those shapes. See, that's already I can manipulate what I already have there as a rectangle. That's why I did what I did there. So now I'll merge with the circle. Always trying to be mindful of my shadows. Dragging with the center of the blue into the part that I want it to go into. You can see I missed the mark on that, so I'll have to redo it. There it is. It's got to be right in the middle of that blue. That blue has to be right in the middle of the object you're merging it with. Watch the blue line on that. Drag down. So I'll pull it down. In that case, I pulled it up to the triangle, and then that blue line sits right in the middle. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just manipulate all my shapes behind my watch hand. This is my hour hand. I'll grab my triangle. Size that up. At the merge tool again. Merge all visible. Pull that aside and then discard the rest. I think we'll keep that rectangle because we're going to use that on our hour hand, or minute hand, excuse me. All right, so we're going to work on our minute hand now. The minute hand uses a trapezoid to go into an arrow. Everything is very simple shapes, just manipulated into what you want to make them. Now, if you don't have a little bit of an overlap in these pieces, it'll leave a seam, I've noticed. So what I try to do is I just try to zoom in and just leave, you can just see there's just a little bit of an overlap there. And that'll prevent a seam from showing up on the final product. Now look at that, and I think that looks just a little too thick. So I'll trim this down just a little bit. When you do enough of these, you start to get a feel for how everything should be balanced. I'm by no means an expert at this. I just really learned how to do this stuff a few months ago. There's just not a whole lot of instructional material on YouTube, so I thought, well, I'll share what little bit of knowledge I have. I'm sure the way that I'm doing this probably isn't the most efficient way to do it, but it is a way to do it. I'm sure I'll probably get corrected in the comments below, or I'm doing something totally backwards or taking the long way to do something, but this is a way to get there, I guess. Right there, it's just the same stuff over and over again. I merged the gold into the object. Now I want to do my inlay. So I'll take a basic shape, basic rectangle. And what you can do is, like if I were to grab like that piece right there, I can't really manipulate that piece. But once I merge it into this rectangle, then I can round it. I can do all kinds of things with it. But the way that this Affinity designer is made, you can't really do a whole lot of manipulation with an object until you do this. So right there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my shadow like I have prior and give this a little bit of depth. And you'll see in the finished product what a difference this really makes. It's little things like this that'll really make your work stand out if you take the time to do these things. That hand really looks like it has depth now. It's not a flat looking hand. I really like the look of those. Okay, so now we're gonna move to our second hand. That'll be our last hand, and what this consists of is 3 circles. There's one, and then there'll be one on the bottom, a smaller one. I think I like that at about 30. Yeah, I usually make those at about 30. I'm doing a voiceover on this. I'm not talking while I'm doing this. I tried to make it as fast as I could. The attention span of most of us isn't an hour's worth of this, especially with me talking over it. Maybe I'd be better off not saying anything and just letting the video play with some music. I guess you always have the option to mute me if you wanted to. So right now, I made that rounded, and then I'm going to manipulate everything to where it looks correct. So that circle, that one doesn't look like it's quite right, so I have to move that down a little bit. And we have to remember that we're working with a rectangle, so that is going to rotate short on the sides. So the length of this, you want to make sure that you're not going with your circle. You sure don't want it to be going off the page. Same process again. Merge your gold. I like to have a lighter end on the tips of my hands. So that's what I did here. That's going to be the top inlay that we're working on right there. Then we're just going to repeat the process over and over and over again. It's the same things over and over again. The more you do it, the more proficient you become with it, like anything else. You can see how flat that would actually look, the gold, if I didn't use the 3D effect. It really makes a difference. Right now I'm gonna dial this in. I'm trying to figure out what size I want that to be. So I moved the center of that. Now I have to move everything back again. Okay, I'm going to make one more little circle. I always like to have a little not always, but usually like to have a little chrome piece on the center. Makes it look realistic. Same rules apply. If I'm going to go 25 there, I got to go 25 on the side. Drag that into place. Then I'll decide from there, do I want to use like a bevel effect? Do I want to increase the 3D effect? In this case, I bring the 3D up a little bit, and I'll zoom out and I'll see how that looks. If I'm not happy with it, then I'll readjust. It's always important when we do our hands that we make sure that we set our center point. That pivot point is crucial. So every time that, like right now, we're going to merge. See, we made that, all those pieces are one object. So if we had set that pivot point prior, it's going to be different now. That pivot point's going to be in the middle again. So when we drag that back to our artboard, what we have to do is we have to put it in the center where we want the center to be. And then we have to bring our pivot point back down. Right there. We centered it. We want to make sure it's 3D'd. And we want to save all of our hands as transparent images, so we make them PNG images. Then save them to your desired folder after you name them. And we're going to just repeat these steps for each hand. Back out after each one. I haven't figured out how to do it where I could just keep one after another. I always have to back out of the program and then do another one. 3D it, center it, there's our pivot point. There, save it, and it's ready to ship. Okay guys, I guess that's pretty much all I have for you on this. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, if you'd like to see more of these, if you want me to build any more watches, I can do the simpler ones. Be more than happy to do another video if you would, or if you'd like me to go over something else in more detail, I'd be happy to do that for you. What I'm doing here is I'm making sure that my center point on both of these is going to be equal. That way I don't have an overlap on the finished product. So I'll set that. Sometimes they'll snap, but for whatever reason this is not snapping the way it usually does. So I'm gonna manually put that over top of it and make sure that my pivot points are set in the same spot so I don't have an overlap. But that's all, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you next time.